Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cisco Optics Podcast, where we talk about pluggable optics for networks. Manufacturing of optics has been historically cumbersome compared to electronics. With optics, you have to align components and glue them down or laser weld them. It was often done by hand because there wasn't enough volume to justify developing fancy robots. Compare this to electronics, where you put tons of devices on a single wafer and stamp them out in a highly automated fab. After years of effort, we finally have a way to stamp out optics too. It's called silicon photonics. The beauty is that we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. It leverages the existing CMOS infrastructure that was already there. This is episode 18, and we continue a conversation with Ron Horan. Ron joined Cisco through the Luxtera acquisition in 2019. Luxtera was spun out of Caltech by a group of professors and students and was known for its groundbreaking approach to silicon photonics. In this episode, we get into the industry's response to silicon photonics. Ron attended the University of Texas at San Antonio for both his bachelor's and master's degrees. His master's thesis topic, entitled Synthetic Vision Landing Aid System, was patented as the first GPS-based aircraft landing aid. From 1994 to 1999, while at Compaq, he earned 15 patent awards. In 2001, he joined Broadcom Corporation, where he managed field applications engineering for the compute segment team, ran program management in the networking BU, and was a senior director of sales and strategic account manager covering the Hewlett-Packard worldwide account. In 2011, Ron moved to Luxtera, where he worked as vice president of sales before moving into the role of vice president of marketing. Luxtera was eventually acquired by Cisco in 2019, where Ron now runs product management for the Cisco Client Optics Group. Who knew that a synthetic vision landing aid system would one day lead to silicon photonics? If you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts. You would follow us now. Depending on which platform you use, we may be part of the Cisco Podcast Network. Check out our blog at blogs.cisco.com and search on hashtag Cisco Optics Blog, all one word, no hyphen and no spaces. You'll find podcast notes and links there too. For our YouTube playlist, go to youtube.com and search on Cisco Optics. And for product information, go to cisco.com/go/optics. And now, join me as I talk with Ron Horan.
You know, it's funny, if you go back and you look at around the 2013 through 2015 timeframe, and you go kind of look at some of the things that industry analysts were saying at that time, they basically were saying that silicon photonics is a science experiment, that, you know, it was a buzzword that was going around the industry, but, you know, kind of the industry analysts' take on it was a science experiment that would never really see the light of day because, you know, it just wasn't ready for prime time. And today, you know, everybody's trying to get to a silicon photonics process. You know, a very large percentage of the transceivers that are being sold into web scale are silicon photonics based. So it's funny how
That's a pretty strong statement, though, right? To say that something's never going to see the light of day.
Yeah, go check it out. It's amazing. It's over, you know, you figure over, you know, 8 to 5 to 8 years, how much that perception has changed by what was believed that would be something that would never actually be able to do high volume manufacturing to actually being the leaders in high volume manufacturing. So,
were there any other milestones in the industry that you can think of, or technology wise, that occurred in the last 10 years or so?
You mean for optics or just silicon photonics? Or?
Well, for silicon photonics.
Well, I think one of the things, you know, at one point we were like the only guy out there, you know, really the only viable guy out, you know, the only company out there doing silicon photonics. But what happened was other companies realized the benefits. And so they kicked off their own programs. And when that started happening and companies started shipping, not just Luxtera, but other companies, the viability factor just went through the roof, right? So, you know, all of a sudden big companies are shipping millions of units a year, and now it's more than just one company. Now a bunch of companies are doing it. So
viability meaning actually shipping real products in real volume. Is that your
Right,
definition?
right. Viability of silicon photonics just went up exponentially when other companies started joining it. I think there was always some kind of it was just at one point it was just Luxtera doing it, and so people kind of looked at it and said, it's not real. So it's interesting what's happened over the last 10 years, how we've gone from that to now everybody has it or everybody needs it, because what's happening is that you're running, two things are happening. Number one is as you get to faster speeds and higher densities, the traditional optics can't keep up. It's a matter of time before you won't be able to do that anymore. And silicon photonics is the only thing that's going to scale to those higher speeds and faster speeds and higher densities.
So what specifically is limiting the traditional type optics from reaching the higher speeds? Is it a power thing?
I think it's the ability going back to the analogy of the light switch. You can only take a light switch and turn it on and off so fast. Just imagine, trying to do it as fast as you can. At some point, you just can't do that anymore, right? Whereas, again, where we have constant wave light, we're turning the light bulb on and leaving it on, and we're relying on the electronics to phase shift the light. Electronics can go really fast. They have much more bandwidth than you and your finger trying to flip on and off that light switch. And so I think that's one of the reasons for that is that it's more of a, it's more driven by the ability to primarily modulate the light.
And at the same time, we have other modulation formats now to reach data rates, right? We have PAM4 now.
Yeah, and I think EMLs are kind of the new thing. I mean, the DML versus EML. At one point, DML basically stopped being able to scale, and so people moved on to EML. EML, I think, stands for electro
absorption.
Yes, yeah, that's it. And so, I think that the knock on EMLs has always been that they're hard to yield, they're very expensive to make, and while they kind of address that problem of scaling for more traditional optics, they're hard to yield and they're expensive to make, and so consequently the pricing is more difficult to come down, right? And so that was always what was believed about that. I think that they've solved some of those problems, although if you look at some of the pricing in the industry, I think silicon photonics will either be better or extremely competitive against an EML. And so that's...
I mean, if it's just about the modulator, would anybody make like an individual Mach-Zehnder interferometer component? Or would they be just like, well, if it's going to be a waveguide structure anyway, you might as well just go full into the silicon photonics integration?
Well, it kind of leads into the second thing. Remember, I said there's two things that are happening. One is the density and the speed. The other thing that's happening is that over time, we're moving away from the front panel pluggable because of power, primarily because of power and cost. We're moving away from a front panel pluggable to eventually we're going to have the optics on the same substrate as the switch, right? Or switch AC. And so the problem with that is you can't have a bunch of piece parts. You can't assemble a bunch of piece parts onto the switch. You need an integrated solution. And that's where I think, the EML starts to break, right? Is because even though it's solving some of the problems of cost and yields, I think that, and you're actually getting more and more integration. I think the level of integration that you get with silicon photonics is much higher than what you'll have with an EML. And so I think people realize that, and that's why you're seeing more and more companies starting to move towards a silicon photonic based solution. So, it's a lot of people believe now it's interesting because we've gone from a science project, less than 10 years ago that the industry analysts were saying it was a science project, to now it's really the only path to being able to get to nirvana. Each optics module, you're wrapping sheet metal and you're wrapping a lot of stuff to get that optics module. And one of the ways to address that is to move away from that and to just like bare die with the heatsink onto a substrate, right? That's one reason.
So you take away the shell and all the other stuff in there to support the function of the module.
Yeah, all the stuff that's needed to get that optics module to work standalone. The other issue is power.
That was the fourth part of my conversation with Ron Horan. Next time, we'll get into alternative packaging for optics for the future. Subscribe to this podcast, and we'd really appreciate you helping to get the word out. Share this with friends and colleagues that come to mind when you think of network technology and optics. And leave a review on Apple Podcast. We're also on all the other major podcast platforms. You may see the Cisco Podcast Network come up when you search for Cisco Optics Podcast. That's where we live, and you can find other great podcasts there too. Also, check out the Cisco Optics blog at blogs.cisco.com and search on hashtag Cisco Optics blog, no spaces and no hyphens. We also have educational videos on YouTube. Just go to youtube.com and search on Cisco Optics. Thank you for listening. This is Pat Chow, Product Manager at Cisco Optics. The next episode is part 5 of my conversation with Ron Horan. Until next time.